rescued, said the witch scornfully. Then said the dwarf, we had better do what we have to do at once. I would like to have done it on the stone table itself, said the witch. That is always the proper place. That is where it has always been done before. It will be a long time before the stone table can again be put to its proper use, said the dwarf. True, said the witch. And then, well, I will begin. At that moment, with a rush and a snarl, the wolf rushed up to them. I have seen the centaur.